Welcome to the Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley with Chris Williamson. Chris, what do we have for the baseline this week?
Well, Ian, in our free agency special almost 2 weeks ago, we discussed names like Fred VanVleet, Gordon Hayward, Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony. Instead, we've seen the additions of Nerlens Noel, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, the return of Elfrid Payton. So, Ian, why didn't the Knicks land any big names?
I think they ended up showing restraint at the end of the day. You know, they were in on Gordon Hayward, but they weren't willing to pay what Charlotte paid Hayward, which was 4 years, $120 million. Fred VanVleet, I think they got the sense, as many other teams did, that he was likely headed back to Toronto. So they weren't going to come over the top with a monster offer for VanVleet. And then a Russell Westbrook, a Chris Paul, Oklahoma City and Houston, respectively. We're looking for assets back in both of those trades that the Knicks weren't willing to part with. So the Knicks are here. They look like they're going to be a bad team this coming season, and they're looking forward to the following off seasons to try to land those stars. But they do have financial flexibility. They haven't overcommitted years-wise to any of these players, and they do have those draft picks moving forward.
Ian, ever since Carmelo Anthony left the Knicks, there's been talk of a reunion potentially, but he ends up re-signing with the Portland Trailblazers. What prevented a Knicks-Melo reunion here?
Well, Chris, leading up to free agency, a few teams felt that Carmelo was going to head to the Knicks, and they felt that way because Portland was pretty confident in being able to re-sign Rodney Hood, and they felt good about being able to sign a veteran power forward, and that power forward would have taken a role away from Carmelo Anthony. That power forward signed elsewhere, opening up a role for Carmelo, and I think that's one of the reasons he ended up back in Portland. Obviously, there's a loyalty factor there with the Blazers and with Damian Lillard. And from a Knick perspective, you know, there was, interest there. There were people in the organization who felt that he could come in and help the young players on this Knick roster kind of handle New York. But ultimately, the pull to go to Portland, once that role opened up, was too great for Carmelo.
We've been on a short break since the start of free agency, so let's catch up on some things we missed in the post office. Dennis Smith Jr. turned 23, while Frank took the opportunity to flex a little on the timeline. Obi took the streets of Manhattan to confront the doubters.
No, bro, that's crazy to me, bro. I can't believe, eighth pick. Eighth pick, what?
And the streets of Brooklyn to hand out some
Fair game? Over there. Fair game.
The other Rook, IQ, reunited with his favorite coach and possibly his best friend, Kenny Payne. Dame Dot said goodbye. Mike Miller peaced out to OKC. And Nate Robinson tried a new sport. Didn't end well. This week's guest is Brandon Williams, a former NBA player who spent 9 seasons in the league office before becoming a front office executive for the Philadelphia 76ers and the Sacramento Kings.
It's too early to tell, but I do like their at least attempt to be patient. When you look at their roster, particularly their financial situation right now, they are poised to be very flexible and be what we'd like to consider a bank over the course of the season. So they're going to get a lot of attention, people trying to dump salaries to them. Makes it a lot more difficult if you put a $25 to $30 million guy at the top of that roster.
Brandon, they still have around $18 million in cap space. Is that a useful weapon for them as you, I guess, approach the trade deadline and teams decide whether they want to go big in free agency for 2021?
I think so, and this year is going to be really interesting. I'm looking at, cap numbers across the league. Half the league is capped, is hard cap, which means they can't exceed the tax apron for any reason. 12, I think, of those teams are guys that should be in the playoffs or looking for a playoff run. So when you think about the old ideas of will they spend into the tax to chase a ring, a lot of those teams are going to be hamstrung. They're going to need to move some players in order to maybe bring in a more expensive player if that guy is available. So who has a chance to take in some of your unwanted contracts? The Knicks will be one. Atlanta will probably be another. I mean, there'll be other teams with cap space, but it is a useful tool.
What do you make of the Knicks not giving up assets for a guy like Russell Westbrook or, CP3? Because there was a lot of chatter and speculation that there might be something there.
I got to imagine that, with this new regime, there's been a conversation really about a new approach, and that it's not time yet to swing for the fences with big contract stars. I mean, even though New York would love the hoopla that comes along with guys like that, I'm not sure that either one of them really delivers the kind of fishing that you won in 2021. Or either one of those guys going to bring in or make it more attractive for Giannis, if that's what the goal is. You got to build the asset base and probably trade your way into a high-level player rather than attract them in free agency.
Hey Ian, big fan. I've been trying to figure out over the last few weeks what to make of this Kentucky CAA infiltration, if you will, of the New York Knickerbockers. Is it a fair bet now to assume that anybody with Kentucky or CAA connections should be in line to maybe be a future member of the New York Knicks? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks, bud.
JJ, appreciate the kind words. I've been a loyal listener to JJ After Dark for years now. If Leon Rose's plan works and the Knicks are built into perennial contenders, nobody's going to care about where players went to college or who their agents were. Same thing goes with Knicks coaches or executives. But if things don't go according to plan, things go sideways, Leon Rose and his group have left themselves open to some criticism because 8 of their moves in this offseason have involved CAA players or players with ties to Kentucky. Let's say it doesn't work out and there's a player who is in this draft who is better than Obi Toppin. You look at that and you say, hey, maybe Leon Rose shouldn't have gone with Obi Toppin, who is a CAA player, should have gone with player X, who turned out to have a pretty good career in the league. So it's just leaving themselves open to criticism. If you're successful, I don't think anybody's going to care about where a player went to school or who his agent was.
And what?
Ian, Knicks fans were hoping that the Knicks would get a point guard in the draft or free agency, a big name particularly, but they don't do either. So what's that point guard situation look like forward as we look at the 2021 season for the Knicks?
Looks like a year for placeholders at the point guard position for New York. One interesting thing to note is Dennis Smith Jr., we've said it a few times, the coaching staff and people in the organization would like to see Smith Jr. get a chance to earn minutes, earn a rotation spot with this club. So, look for him to get all opportunities in training camp. With Elfrid Payton back, he's probably the odds-on favorite to win a starting job going into training camp in the preseason. It seems like a placeholder year for the Knicks to go ahead and look for that point guard of the future, either in the draft or the offseason in next summer.
RJ Barrett certainly picked at a level you'd expect him to be more than just a piece. You want him to be a guy, in personnel talk. He's got to be a guy. The problem is that you don't have enough support, or in the last year, he didn't have enough support for him to find the easy role into the NBA. He's carrying too much of a load. But I think that the competitive nature is going to always push him to give you 90 to 100% of what he's got. Question only is will his skill catch up to his competitive drive and nature? Mitchell's a different case. I mean, he didn't have the kind of coaching and preparation leading to his rookie year in the NBA, so you don't quite have enough evidence. He's very raw. He's developed quite nicely. He shows you sort of what he could be. It's really interesting that Nerlens Noel is on the team now because they're sort of like, a carbon copy. This super athletic, rangy guy. Maybe he's got a little bit more offense than Nerlens, but if he can be that kind of defender, protect the rim, be an above the rim finisher, that's going to be valuable on any team that's looking to make a deep run to the playoffs.
It's been reported that James Harden, one of his preferred destinations, trade destinations, was the Brooklyn Nets.
I think everybody kind of assumed going into the offseason that they were going to do whatever it took to re-sign Joe Harris. We talk about this third star to pair with Durant and Kyrie Irving, and that move hasn't been made yet.
That puzzles me, and I hate to pause on that because it could be one of the world's greatest things. Right? For all of us who love just watching good basketball, entertaining basketball, it could also be a disaster. A lot of what we remember, that OKC team that took the Miami Heat down the stretch, that's a long time ago. That James Harden and the way that he played and the way he played with KD, and maybe substitute Russell Westbrook for more offensively gifted and versatile Kyrie. Maybe that's sort of the image that flashes before your eyes, but that's when they were developing. They've settled into roles, and I'm not sure exactly how they mesh. But the good thing about players, they can always decide to figure it out. What's for sure is that on paper, they will be one of the most potent offensive and gifted teams that we've ever seen. So a lot of me would like to see that deal pulled off. But look, it's going to take a lot of assets out of Brooklyn's coffers to get that done. I mean, Houston's not going to trade a generational talent for just a set of picks. I think you're looking much more at the AD deal structure than anyone else if they're to get Harden out of Houston.
Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. For Chris, I'm Ian. We'll see you next week on the Putback.
So how do you feel about the Knicks' patient approach in Leon Rose's first offseason as Knicks president? That is this week's Putback Poll presented by AAA Northeast, now offering DMV services at NYC branches. Go to sny.tv/vote now to share your thoughts.